The silent Plath sky above the council world was always golden and still, but on this day, the air felt heavy in the stars. Beyond the dome no longer offered comfort as the members of the Galactic Alliance gathered inside the high chamber. They looked tired, their expressions showing fear more than wisdom. Each species present carried the weight of extinction in their eyes. For centuries, the Alliance believed they were the most advanced collection of life in the galaxy. They had survived natural disasters, civil wars, economic collapses, and even internal betrayals, but none of that had prepared them for what they now faced. The enemy, called the Swarm, moved like a disease, spreading from one system to the next with no mercy and no voice. There was no diplomacy, no warning, only destruction. They consumed planets, ships, people, everything. Their numbers seemed endless, their minds connected in a way that no tactic could break. Alliance had sent fleets of warships crafted with the finest technology, but even their most powerful weapons barely slowed the advance. Generals had argued, scientists had failed, strategists had resigned. Now they were left with very few options, and time was running out. At the center of the room, a voice rose, calm and firm. It belonged to Marek, a thin being with silver skin and glowing blue veins. He was old but respected for his wisdom. His species had once stopped a planetary war using only logic. Now even Marek had no answers. He spoke, not with confidence but with desperation. "There's only one species we have not asked," he said, and as he said, many heads turned. Some eyes narrowed, others rolled, some even whispered among themselves. It was clear who he meant. "The humans," said one council member with a hiss. "They are violent, reckless, disorganized. They are not part of this alliance. They are barely spacefaring." Another voice followed. "They fight among themselves. They destroy their own world. How can they be of use to anyone?" Marek raised his hand to silence them. "We have tried everything else. We have followed rules, structure, traditions. The Swarm does not obey such things, and it is because of that we fail. The humans do not follow rules either. Perhaps this is the only reason they might succeed." The silence that followed was thick. Some council members stared at the floor. Others avoided eye contact, but no one offered a better idea. Finally, the vote was called. The result was narrow, but clear. Desperation had made the choice. For them, they would reach out to Earth, not for weapons or troops, but for leadership, for creativity, for something different. Message was sent across the stars, short and simple, a request not for aid, but for help in saving all life in the galaxy. It arrived on Earth within hours, and after days of silence, a response returned. "We will come." The humans had answered. Weeks passed as the Alliance waited. Many doubted the decision, but it was too late to turn back. They had committed their final hope to a species they barely understood. When the human vessel arrived, it was small, not flashy, not threatening, but efficient. It carried only a handful of people, all dressed in practical clothing. No ceremonial armor, no shining metals. They introduced themselves with short names: Ray, Aina, Tom, Nur, and Kai. They were not what the council expected. Ray was chosen as the lead. He was older than the others, quiet, calm, his eyes sharp and his voice steady. When he spoke, he did not ask for rank or command. Instead, he asked to see the war records, the failed strategies, the attack logs, the retreat paths. He wanted to understand why the Swarm was winning. Studied everything for days without speaking much. He met the generals, listened to survivors, even walked through the wreckage of a fallen defense station. While others saw only failure, he took notes, sketched on paper, drew lines, maps, ideas, patterns. When he finally spoke again, his words were strange. "You're trying to fight fire with fire," he said. "You need to drown it instead." The generals did not understand, but Marek nodded. He saw something in Ray's eyes, something that was not madness, but vision. Ray requested only a small team and a single ship. He refused to use the Alliance's massive carriers. He said they were too slow, too predictable. Instead, he took a team of mixed species volunteers, trained them not in how to follow orders, but how to think, how to adapt, how to survive without relying on superior force. Their first mission was to a minor moon near the front lines, a place already lost. The Swarm had taken over its mines and tunnels. The Alliance had declared it unreachable. Ray disagreed. He and his team landed quietly, used the tunnels to move unseen, planted traps that did not explode, but instead confused the swarm's senses, scattered false signals, used holograms to make it appear. They were everywhere and nowhere at once. The time the swarm realized what was happening, half of their forces on the moon had turned on each other. The remaining ones were drawn into empty caverns, sealed with magnetic locks and buried alive. The Alliance watched in disbelief. A mission that was supposed to fail had turned into the first true victory in months, not through force but through misdirection and calculated risk. Ray returned without celebration. He simply gave his report and asked for another team. "This is not war as you know it," he said. "This is not about power. It is about pressure, timing, and confusion. If we continue to fight like you always have, we will lose. But if we make the swarm fight like we do, they will lose." Some still doubted, others called him dangerous, but the results could not be denied. For the first time, the swarm had been forced to retreat. The council began to whisper again, but this time the word human carried a different tone. It was not scorn or fear. It was something closer to hope. So the galaxy watched as humans stepped into a war. They did not start with tools no one understood, in minds that refused to follow the old paths. They were not the strongest. They were not the oldest, but they were something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. The final gamble had been played, and now everyone waited to see how far the humans would go. Unorthodox minds. The halls of the Alliance station had always echoed with the sound of order, footsteps moving in rhythm, commands issued with clarity and precision. But now something unfamiliar stirred inside those same corridors. Soldiers, once trained to follow structure, stood in silence, watching humans who moved without the usual discipline, their steps unpredictable, their plans difficult to follow, yet strangely effective. Ray moved with purpose, yet without pride. He carried no rank badges, no medals. His presence alone made others pause. He studied every corner, every wall, every error left behind by past commanders. He asked questions that others never considered: why the swarm never changed formation, why the fleet formations were always the same, why the defenses were built in patterns that even the enemy could memorize. No one had asked those questions before, and that was the problem. In the war room where strategy was born, maps covered the walls, systems blinking with red lights, warnings of attacks, lost outposts, and retreat paths. But Ray did not look at the maps with fear. He stared at them like puzzles waiting to be broken. He placed small pieces of glass on different sectors, each piece marked with a symbol no one else understood. He called them variables, said the enemy was not invincible, only unchallenged. Beside him, the other humans worked in silence. Tom with his strange humor, Noor with sharp eyes, Aina drawing diagrams with food packets on the table, Kai listening to radio signals that others considered noise. Each had a role, but none followed the usual patterns. They operated like a mind broken into pieces, working in all directions and still finding results. The first joint mission was approved under pressure. Many council members still argued against it. They feared letting humans lead anything. They feared chaos, mistakes, dishonor. But Marek reminded them that their pride had already lost too many worlds. Ray chose a mix of volunteers for his team: 2 insectoid soldiers with fast reflexes, a lizard-like scout with night vision, and an avian tactician who had once been dismissed for being too unpredictable. He trained them without formal drills. He taught them how to think outside structure, how to trust their instincts, how to break the enemy's rhythm instead of trying to match it. They practiced not in fields or simulators, but in maintenance shafts, in empty cargo bays and gravity shifts and silent corridors. They created games where the only rule was survival. And slowly they began to think like humans, move like humans, act without waiting for perfect orders. Mission was to reclaim a relay station on the edge of Sector 10, an abandoned outpost now crawling with swarm units. Previous attempts had failed. Every entry was blocked, every escape route cut. But Ray did not approach the station directly. He sent his team in from below through forgotten maintenance tunnels. While the enemy expected attack from the front, the humans and their team entered through dust-filled service paths and vents too narrow for machines inside. The station, they used mirrors to bounce light down corridors, created fake sounds with broken machines, and planted thermal decoys in open spaces. The swarm chased shadows, fired at echoes, and walked into empty traps. In one room, they used nothing but a stack of cooking trays and a heating coil to mimic a reactor explosion. The swarm retreated in panic, giving the team full access to the control center. By the time the main fleet arrived, the station was secure, and not a single human life had been lost. The Alliance was shocked again. What was expected to be another failure turned into a silent victory, not by crushing power, but by psychological disruption. Ray submitted his report without ceremony. The report was short and simple, with diagrams of misdirection, pressure points, and signals marked with strange symbols. The generals read it in silence. Some were confused, some insulted, but a few began to understand. Swarm did not fear strength. They feared what they could not predict. They feared what they could not understand. News spread across stations. Some laughed, some resisted, but others asked for training, requested human advisors, began to try strange ideas. They once mocked on another station. Aina worked with engineers to redesign defense systems, not with stronger shields, but with moving walls, rotating cover, and deceptive entry points. Tom began creating false distress beacons, drawing the swarm into ambushes designed with misaligned gravity and sound traps. Noor started teaching signal manipulation, using broken comms to send false commands to enemy drones. The humans did not bring new weapons, they brought new thinking, and slowly the galaxy began to change. Ray continued forward, requesting new missions, always choosing places marked as lost places considered beyond saving, and every time he brought back results, maybe not perfect, maybe not clean, but always different and always better than before. The swarm started reacting slower. Their attacks lost rhythm. Their movements became cautious. Hesitation entered their pattern for the first time. The predators had learned fear. Still, many in the council resisted, their pride wounded, their structure shaken. They spoke against the human methods, saying they lacked honor, saying they mocked tradition. But Marek stood again in the chamber and asked a single question: if tradition is defeat, what honor remains in extinction? The chamber fell silent again, as it had before when the final vote brought humans into this war. The swarm had taken planets in silence, burning them in their march of hunger. But now whispers of human victories spread across systems, not because they won with numbers, but because they changed the fight itself. And so the Alliance began to shift, small changes at first, then bigger ones. Ranks loosened, rigid plans, open minds widened across species. New voices rose with strange questions, and ideas once mocked were now explored. They no longer followed the old book. They started to write a new one, page by page, forged in risk and guided by minds that refused to obey fear. And at the center of this quiet revolution stood a man with no uniform, a team with no titles, and a species once seen as dangerous now becoming the very thing the galaxy depended on, not because they were perfect, not because they were peaceful, but because they saw what others did not, and dared to try what others never would. The gamble was no longer a gamble, it was becoming a lesson, and the swarm was beginning to feel it. Friction and fire across the galaxy. Things were beginning to shift. Stations, once filled with doubt, now whispered tales of strange victories led by humans, where failure had lived. Now possibility stirred. Alien commanders started rewriting their doctrines, using words they once refused to say: human tactics, human strategy, human instinct. But not everyone welcomed the change. Within the Alliance command, a storm was building, not on the battlefield, but inside the minds of those who had ruled for centuries. Old commanders with shining badges spoke in anger. Behind closed doors, they accused the humans of spreading chaos. They claimed the victories were lucky accidents. They argued that tradition was being poisoned by unpredictability. A voice rose above the others. His name was Karun, a sharp-minded officer from one of the founding species. His words carried weight. He spoke with pride and caution. His people had won many wars by planning decades ahead. Now he stood before the council and questioned the wisdom of relying on what he called improvisation over order. He feared that the humans were leading the Alliance into madness, not salvation. Marek listened Without reaction, his old hands folded, his gaze fixed on nothing, yet missing nothing. When Karun finished, Marek simply said, "Show us a better way," and the chamber fell quiet. Far from the council halls, Ray continued his work. His team had grown in size, now joined by volunteers from multiple species: soldiers, engineers, scouts, thinkers, even some who had once doubted him. They all trained together under no flags, under no hierarchy. They learned to move as one unit, guided not by command, but by awareness. Among them was a young officer named Tari. Her skin shimmered with blue light, and her voice carried calm logic. She had studied traditional tactics, her entire life trained in ranks built for control. Now she watched humans teach ideas that had once been forbidden in her academies. She expected arrogance from them, but what she saw was humility, not weakness, but quiet certainty. Ray noticed her curiosity and began including her in small operations. He showed her how to see the battlefield not as lines and zones, but as patterns and rhythm. He spoke of pressure, timing, deception, emotion. These were things her education had never touched, and it changed Heron. A quiet moment after training, Tari asked Ray why he fought this way, why he never gave direct orders, why he treated war like art instead of science. Ray answered without pride, "Because when the enemy has no rules become your chains." Their next mission came sooner than expected. Intelligence revealed that a major swarm fleet was moving toward a resource-rich system where 5 planets hung close in orbit. The Alliance had declared it a no-win zone, too wide to defend, too close for escape. Ray disagreed. He proposed an idea no one had tried. He would not defend any planet. Instead, he would convince the swarm that something more valuable was hidden there, something they could not resist, something that would force them to change formation, slow their attack, and expose their core vessels. He asked the Alliance to leak false data, messages encoded to suggest an experimental weapon was buried under the smallest planet. The swarm intercepted the signals as planned and altered course, focusing their power where Ray wanted. While they moved toward the trap, Ray's team scattered across the orbits, planting reflectors on asteroids, small devices that bounced signals and created false images in space. The swarm believed the system was full of hidden fleets, full of enemies waiting in the dark. They moved carefully, slowly. Confused Ray used that hesitation to strike not with strength, but with timing. His units hit from multiple angles using gravity slings, debris fields, and timed pulse bursts to fracture the swarms. Coordination, each strike small, but critical every second they bought, was another step toward confusion. Tari led one of the flanks, her squad made up of soldiers from 3 different species. She used what she had learned, created illusions of movement, forced the enemy to chase ghosts when her ship was nearly cornered. She used signal mimicry to fake its destruction. The swarm believed they had won that flank. They moved forward into the kill zone. Ray waited until their biggest carrier passed through the false data field, then triggered the final phase. The reflectors collapsed, and the swarm found themselves surrounded by their own confusion, unable to understand where the real threat was. They scattered, and in that chaos the Alliance fleet struck from behind. The battle ended not in total destruction, but in retreat. The swarm lost control for long, enough to be pushed out of the system. They regrouped later, but something had changed. They had been tricked, manipulated, broken in a way they had never seen. Back at command, celebrations, rose cheers filled stations, but not all joined in behind smiles. Some still whispered words of doubt. They claimed it was too risky, said humans would one day push too far, break too much, and leave nothing behind. But those who had fought beside them knew better. They had seen the power of adaptability. They had tasted victory through unity, not command. Tari was called before the council to give her account. She stood straight, eyes calm, voice steady. She told them what she had seen, how human thinking had saved her squad, how emotion was not a weakness, how logic alone could not win this war. She spoke not as a follower, but as a believer. Her words silenced many and opened a few minds. Meanwhile, Ray walked through the wreckage of his ship, which had taken damage during the mission. He said nothing as he moved through twisted metal and broken glass. He picked up a small item from the floor, A training tag from one of the fallen soldiers. He kept it in his pocket. Without a word, he did not seek praise. He did not care for fame. He cared only for the next battle, the next lesson, the next mistake to learn from far. Away the swarm moved in silence, their minds connected across the stars. But within that silence, something new had entered, a question, a pause, a pattern they could not solve. Humans were rewriting the fight, changing the rhythm, breaking the dance of war. And now the swarm was no longer sure. If it could keep up, the fire had been lit, and it would burn through the old ways until only something new remained. The collapse before the rise. The stars watched in silence as the war spread wider. The swarm no longer advanced in a straight line. Now they moved with caution, their attacks slowed by confusion, their patterns twisted by fear. What once had been a clean sweep across systems had become scattered with strange pauses and irregular moves. It was not defeat yet, but it was no longer complete control. Ray stood before a new map, his eyes moving across systems, not with urgency, but with thought. He knew the swarm was shifting. He could feel it in the gaps between attacks and the hesitation of their formations. The enemy had started adapting, but not in the way the Alliance expected. They were watching, listening, testing his methods, copying the rhythm, but not the reason. Ray spoke softly to his team. We have forced them to see us, but now they will try to become us. His voice was calm, but everyone around him felt the weight of those words. This was the moment where risk would become danger, where creativity would invite chaos. If they failed now, the galaxy might fall faster than before. Mission arrived from the High Command. A relay station near the border had gone dark. It was a deep space structure used for communication between sectors. Its fall would silence entire fleets and give the swarm a clear path into unprotected systems. The Council expected a delay operation, maybe even a retreat, but Ray saw something else. He called for immediate launch, only a small team, no fleets, no support, no delay. He wanted to reach the station before the swarm secured it completely. Marek approved without hesitation, but many others called it reckless. Ray took Aina, Nor, Tom, Kai, and a few mixed species operatives with him. The journey was long and silent, each of them knowing they might not return. When they arrived, the station floated in space. Like a corpse, the outer hull cracked, the lights flickering, no signs of life, no signals. Just the quiet hum of forgotten machines. They entered without resistance, but inside the silence became noise, not loud, but thick with tension. The air held something cold, something unnatural. They moved carefully, every corner, every shadow a possible trap, and then they found it. The swarm had not claimed the station yet, but someone had betrayed the Alliance from within. A small unit of elite guards, loyal to one of the ancient species, had sealed the relay and planted a device meant to corrupt every outgoing signal. Their goal was simple: protect their homeworld. By giving the swarm a path away from it, their fear had turned into treason. Ray confronted the leader, a tall figure with golden armor, and shaking hands he begged for understanding. Claimed it was the only way to save his people. Ray looked at him for a long moment and said, "If we save one world by burning 10, what is left worth saving?" Battle inside the station was fast, not a war, but a heartbreak. The traitors were defeated, but the damage was done. The device had already sent signals to the swarm, and now they were coming in numbers. Ray looked around and saw no escape. The station was too damaged, the team too few to fight a full assault. But then he saw something else. A broken chamber once used for energy testing. A risk appeared in his mind, sharp and dangerous. He told the others what he planned. No one argued. They began turning the station into a mirror, not of glass, but of data. They rerouted the signal core to bounce energy waves in reverse. They created copies of their own fleet using leftover signal fragments. They hacked the swarm's own scanners to show false positions, and then they waited. When the swarm arrived, they did not find a handful of humans. They saw a full fleet waiting, a web of ships aimed at them with signals, screaming threat and fire. They paused, not out of fear, but confusion. They scanned, they calculated, they searched for a week. Point Ray used that moment and activated the final phase. The mirror fractured into thousands of smaller signals, and the swarm saw themselves surrounded. They turned to retreat, But the humans had already locked the station's energy. Pulse into a countdown. The core exploded not with fire, but with distortion, sending a wave across the area that shattered communication and bent sensors for miles. Swarm was thrown into chaos, not destroyed, but blinded and split their units. Scattered, some crashed into asteroids, others turned on each other, thinking they had been betrayed by their own kind. Ray's team escaped using escape pods. Masked by the signal storm, they drifted into deep space until Marek's recovery vessel found them hours later. The station was gone, but so was the threat. For now, and in that destruction, the Alliance saw something more than survival. They saw the art of war transformed again, not by strength, not by speed, but by thought and timing. Ray returned to base in silence, but his face was different, now not calm, but heavy. His team had suffered. Noor was injured. Tom had lost his hearing for days, and Kai refused to speak about what he saw in the last seconds before escape. Back at the council chamber, arguments broke once again. Some praised the mission, others called it too dangerous. Some said Ray was pushing too far too fast, but Marek stood and said the old way failed with honor. The new way wins with scars. Choose which one you want to carry. The council said nothing more. Tari met Ray outside the chamber, her eyes searching his face. She did not ask if he was all right. Instead, she said, the swarm is changing. They are copying us, but they cannot become us because they do not feel. Ray nodded, not with pride, but with a quiet understanding. The war was no longer just survival. It was now a battle of minds, of belief, of vision. And the galaxy was watching, not just for who would win, but for who would lead when it ended. The collapse had been close, the darkness nearly full. But something had risen from within the broken mirrors, a new shape, a new fire, a path forward. And somewhere in the silence between the stars, the swarm began to doubt, not in its power, but in its future. The war we rewrote, the final day, did not begin with fire or fear. It began with silence across the outer systems. Ships floated in stillness. Outposts waited without sound. The swarm had paused, not in defeat, but in calculation. They no longer attacked without thought. They no longer rushed forward with endless hunger. Now they hesitated, observed, copied. They were becoming something new, something dangerous. In the command chamber of the Alliance core station, lights dimmed to save power. The war had drained every source, every planet, every resource. The commanders sat in quiet lines, their eyes tired, their thoughts tangled in defeat plans drawn on walls no longer held meaning. They had seen everything fail except one thing, the human mind. Ray stood before them, without armor, without medals, only his voice and a worn map made of paper. His hands marked it with ink lines, arrows, points of pressure, shapes drawn from memory, not technology. He spoke not of battles, but of understanding. He said the swarm had begun to mimic strategy, but not intent. They saw the surface, not the reason. They copied the dance, but not the soul. He told them the swarm now believed in control, believed that by becoming like humans they would win, but the truth was hidden deeper. The strength of humanity was never just in change, it was in chaos, not mindless chaos, but controlled unpredictability, emotion, thought, instinct working together in patterns that could not be calculated. The council asked for a plan. Ray said there would be no fleet, no grand battle, no wall of weapons. Instead, they would win by making the swarm break itself. He would show them a version of the future they could not understand, and they would destroy themselves trying to reach it. They gave him one chance, one ship, one final mission. He gathered his team, Tari, Anatam, Kai, and others who had stood beside him through storms and fire. They launched in silence into a dead sector where the swarm's command hive had hidden for years, a massive structure orbiting a black star, feeding on energy unknown to most of the galaxy. Here, the final decision would be made. Ray had no intention of fighting directly. Instead, he used the tools built from 1,000 lessons. His ship carried no bombs, no heavy guns. It carried information code. Loops, viral data mirror networks built by Kai, mixed with false memory archives designed by Aina, and signal traps that echoed the sound of retreat. Tari had programmed language pulses that mimicked swarm thought patterns and scattered their inner Voice as they approached the hive, they sent nothing, only silence. Then a flicker, a whisper, a fake distress signal, followed by a broken image of a human fleet moving toward another system. Then another signal showing alien betrayal, then a visual of the hive under attack by unknown forces, all false, all crafted, all perfectly timed. Swarm moved its first defense ships away from the hive, chasing shadows. The second wave turned inward, checking for internal sabotage. The core command split into fragments, trying to read every signal, every possibility, and the mirror data began to fold back on itself, forcing the swarm to analyze patterns that did not exist. Their perfect connection became noise inside the hive. Panic was not visible, but it was growing. They had never needed emotion, but now they faced a problem that required more than logic. They saw threats where none existed. They saw betrayal in their own voice. They turned on each other. Their unity cracked under the weight of uncertainty. Ray's ship slipped through the gaps unnoticed. It released no weapons, only one final message to the hive, a simple phrase written in their own code: "Your pattern has ended." And then they left. The swarm did not collapse in 1 second. It unraveled like cloth, pulled apart thread by thread. Ships lost communication, units fired at shadows. Relay nodes shut down without command. Fleets waiting for orders turned cold, and still the central hive pulse slowed, then vanished across the galaxy. Swarm units lost their direction. Their hunger vanished without purpose. Some floated into suns, others crashed into moons, some drifted in silence. Like ghosts of war, the Alliance watched from every system. Every species saw the moment when the enemy faded, not from strength, but from confusion. They had not been destroyed. They had been rewritten. War ended not with explosions, but with disbelief. Commanders stared at blank screens. Soldiers waited for alarms that never came. The galaxy stood still, unsure of what peace even meant. Ray returned with his team in silence. They were met with no parade, no loud honor. Just the quiet steps of those who understood what had been done. Myrick greeted him with no words, only a hand on his shoulder. Tari stood beside him, her eyes full of something new, not pride, not relief, but respect, a deep understanding that went beyond victory. She had seen the old world fall and a new one rise, built not on tradition, but on courage. And Minden, the great hall of the Alliance, the council offered Ray a title, a seat, a command he refused. Everyone, he said, his place was not in power, but in change. He handed Marek the paper map, now worn, torn, and burned at the edges, and said, "This is what won the war, not the stars, not the ships, not the code, but the way we looked at the problem." He turned to leave, and the chamber stood quiet, not in disagreement, but in agreement. Sometimes the greatest strength is to walk away. As Ray disappeared into the corridor, the lights above flickered, then glowed steady again. Systems restored, alarms sung, a space calm once more. And across every world where war had once lived, people began to rebuild. Not just cities, but thought systems, training, education, all changed by what the humans had shown them. The galaxy no longer followed the old art of war. It followed something new, a rhythm born from Earth, a way of fighting that used fear not as a weapon, but as a mirror, and used weakness not as shame, but as opportunity. The final gamble had worked, and from that day forward the name human no longer meant risk, it meant reason. The end.